She lived alone, 40 barren miles to the nearest town. No roads, no neighbors, no assistance. Just wind, quiet, and remembrance of a man that she had loved. Clara Whitmore was at her kitchen window when she noticed the dust cloud. 7 horsemen, slicing through the gloaming like fire shadows. Their forms grew larger with each step, until she could discern their faces. Weathered, keen, starving. They weren't lost. Men did not stumble into this location with ease. Clara's hands grasped for the rifle next to the door. She knew it as well as her own pulse. She'd mastered it the day her husband died, left her this land, this cabin, and one bitter reality. Out here, survival wasn't taken. It was taken. The first rider got off. He was tall, sporting a scar down his left cheek and eyes that roamed her house as if he already owned the place. Dalton Keene. She didn't know his name yet, but she knew his type. "Evenin', ma'am," he called, tipping his hat with a mock politeness that made her skin crawl. "We've been ridin' hard. Wonderin' if you've got room for a few tired men to rest their bones." Clara didn't move from the window. Her hand stayed on the rifle. Honest men asked for water, directions, maybe a meal. They didn't ask to sleep under a lone woman's roof. "I don't receive strangers," she told him coolly through the glass. Dalton's grin quivered, but not in his eyes. "Now that's not very neighborly." Behind him, the other 6 riders started to fan out. Not like weary travelers, but like wolves around prey. Clara had seen that formation once before. She didn't need to hear snarling to sense when she was being hunted. "My response remains the same." Dalton's face set in a scowl. "Ma'am, I wasn't exactly a skinned." Her heart quickened, but her mind clear. 7 men. 1 woman. No assistance for miles. No one to hear a scream. And they did know that. They were relying on that. But what they did not realize was this. Clara Whitmore was no helpless frontier widow. She had spent the past 3 years studying this country. Its every rise, its every hiding spot, every inch that would allow her the slightest advantage. And she had made one promise over her husband's grave. She would never be prey again. Her fingers worked swiftly. The rifle was loaded, 6 bullets. 7 men. The math didn't favor her, but she'd never needed numbers. Her greatest weapon was never lead, it was resolve. "We're coming in, ma'am," Dalton warned. "Easy or hard don't matter. We're sleepin' here tonight." She saw him give signals to his men. 3 moved towards the front entrance, 2 towards the rear. The remaining 2 kept the horses but remained with weapons drawn. These weren't travelers, they were predators. She strode swiftly through the darkness, avoiding creaking boards she'd learned years before. Under one loose board, a secret compartment was hidden, just the way Thomas had constructed it. 3 sticks of dynamite, kerosene, matches, a war fund for a day like today. The back door splintered. Boots thudded across her kitchen floor. "Find her," Dalton ordered. "Every room." Clara hid behind the fireplace, her hands shaking as she wet a rag in kerosene and tied it around the head of the first piece of dynamite. She could hear them, fumbling and cursing as they searched. They didn't know they were running out of time. She lit a match. The small flame hissed to life, casting her face for an instant in the dim light before she applied it to the fuse. And then she heard it, laughing. And one voice, cold and sharp. "Boss, check out what I found in her bedroom. Wedding dress still hangin'. This one's been alone a long time." Their laughter spoke volumes to her. They hadn't stumbled upon her by chance. They had tracked her down. Because she was alone. Because no one would be coming to look for her. They didn't crave refuge. They craved prey. But tonight they'd picked the wrong woman. She rolled the firelit dynamite into the kitchen. It mixed in with the firewood in the darkness. She leaned against the stone, ears plugged. "Hey, what's that?" one of them said. "Something's rollin'." And then, the explosion ripped through the cabin like the roar from hell's mouth. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. The kitchen was consumed in flame and smoke. 3 men were caught up in the explosion. 2 motionless, 1 crawling, bloodied and battered. Clara's ears were ringing. She couldn't hear herself breathe, but she could see flames spreading in Dalton. Bleeding, stumbling, still upright. She took the rifle and the last of the dynamite. For we're down. 3 remained. The numbers were in her favor now. Outside, horses screamed. More feet pounded toward the fire. Clara crept into the crawlspace under the hearth. Another Thomas gift. The tunnel led her to the woodshed 30 yards in back of the cabin. When she stumbled out, the final remnant of home, the only place she'd ever known safety, was burning to the ground. She hid behind the woodshed, dynamite in her hands, watching the burning ruins and the 3 men still convinced they had her trapped. "Burn it down," Dalton yelled. "She's in there somewhere." They thought the fire would drive her out. But Clara wasn't in there. She was already behind them, with a plan, with anger, and with nothing left to lose. Everything she had ever loved had just been reduced to ash. All that was left now was revenge. Her home, her tranquility, her past. The flames spat behind her like the slamming of a coffin, devouring the final vestiges of life she'd created with Thomas. The men responsible for this laughed in its glare, satisfied with the havoc they'd planted. But what they didn't know was that something within Clara had shifted. The pain had incinerated, and what remained wasn't terror. It was something tougher, colder, more deadly. Thomas had always said to her that revenge would be a luxury they couldn't afford. But Thomas was dead, and when you had nothing to begin with, luxury took on a different connotation. Clara ignited the second stick of dynamite. She was not hiding this time. The fire obscured her movements as she moved forward like a ghost of smoke. The men were grouped close to the horses, who were rearing, frightened, panicking. Clara did not shoot at the men. She threw the dynamite at the horses. Before the outlaws had time to move, the fuse sizzled under the horses' feet. The explosion that followed ripped through the pandemonium. 2 horses fell dead. The others scattered in a whirl of shrieks and shattered reins. Clara ducked behind cover, and in the fog of smoke, she raised her rifle, trigger finger poised. Dalton was right there, broad back, vulnerable. But just as she pulled the trigger, a horse rushed forward into her line of fire. Then another. The moment passed. When the smoke had cleared, only 2 men remained standing. Dalton was gone. "Where is she?" one man yelled. "Where's that witch hiding?" From her position behind them, Clara smiled. That was the correct word now, witch. Not woman. Not widow. A force. A fury. A woman who had nothing left to lose, and one final stick of dynamite still clutched in her hand. Before she could act, a voice cut through the darkness behind her. "Lookin' for me?" Clara spun around. Dalton was 10 feet away, blood running down his temple, gun pointed directly at her chest. His smile was cold and twisted, born of cruelty and the high of the hunt. "Slowly drop the rifle," he said. "And the dynamite. Slow. If you were Clara, what would you have done? Give up and hope for mercy from a man who did not show it? Or bet everything on one last desperate gamble?" Clara caught it in his gaze. He was sure he'd already won. That is what made him cocky. The chink she needed. "You know what I like about women like you?" Dalton sneered. "You fight pretty well. Right until the end." She raised her hands slowly, rifle in one hand, dynamite in the other. "You want him?" She spoke softly. "Come and get em. Clever girl. Now put them down." But Clara didn't. She smiled instead. "Tell me something, Dalton. Did you time the seconds on that last blast?" His grin slipped. "What? 30 seconds from light to boom. That's the length of a fuse," she said. Her smile grew. "I lit this one 40 seconds ago." It was a falsehood, but Dalton didn't know that. His eyes went wide in instant fear, his gaze fixed on the dynamite in her hand, mind racing with terror. Clara dropped sideways as his bullet snapped through the air, inches from her back. She rolled behind a water barrel, rose shooting. Her first bullet hit his shoulder. He reeled about, screaming. The second one missed as he staggered for the blaze. "You witch lunatic!" Dalton bellowed, clamping his wounded shoulder. Clara ignited a live match this time. 29 seconds. "Dalton," she shouted. 28, 27. Dalton wheeled and limped toward his men, still crouched behind an upended wagon. 15. 14. She saw them falter and flee, fear unspooling what little courage they had left. Dalton hobbled after them, his face distorted with anger and shame. 5. 4. 3. Clara threw the dynamite not at their backs but behind them, near enough to make a point, far enough to allow them to live. The explosion hurled them forward, tumbling into the ground, but they struggled up and vanished into the trees. She might have killed them, but she didn't. That was her message. That was mercy, and a warning. Clara was the only one in the ruins of her life. Her house a charred skeleton, her horses dead or scattered. The life she and Thomas had created was lost. But she lived, and something new had been planted within her. She wasn't a survivor anymore. She was a defender, a warrior. She was a woman who could outsmart, outendure, and outfight the worst that the world had to offer. She'd learned that to survive wasn't about holding on to what once was. It was about deciding what next was. By morning, the cabin glowed red in golden light. 3 bodies lay among the embers. Clara didn't rejoice in their deaths, but she didn't grieve for them either. They had made their decision. Dalton and his 2 men who were wounded were still out there somewhere, alive but altered, and they'd have a scarred lesson to take with them for the rest of their lives. Not every woman alone is helpless. Not every cabin is undefended. Clara made her way through the detritus of her house. In the remains of her bedroom, under the twisted iron skeleton of her bed, she discovered the little wooden box that had endured everything. Inside, Thomas's wedding ring, the title to the property, and $43 in wadded bills. That was everything she had left. But it was sufficient. Then, the sound of hoofbeats broke the silence. Her hand went to the rifle. But it was Pete Morrison, the old rancher from town. He dismounted slowly, eyes sweeping over the destruction. "Saw the smoke from 15 miles out," he said, voice low. "Figured I'd come check." Clara nodded. 7 men came calling. 4 of 'em stayed. That was all he needed to hear. On the frontier, survival spoke louder than explanations. "You rebuildin'?" Clara gazed around. The location had once been her wish, her refuge. Today, it seemed like a specter she'd have to continue struggling to reclaim. "No," she said. "This page is closed." Pete agreed, then rummaged through his saddlebag. "Could be timely, then. Received a letter from my cousin in Colorado. Town of Silver Creek needs a schoolteacher. Good people. Good salary. House rented." She stared at him, intrigued despite herself. Clara accepted the letter and read. Employment. Shelter. Reason. Thomas would have wanted this for her. "How quickly could you get there?" she inquired. 2 weeks on horse. I can take you that far." She stepped to the edge of her garden. The apple trees Thomas had planted were charred but intact. They'd bounce back, even if she wouldn't be here to witness it. "I'll do it," Clara said. "When do we go?" 3 months had passed, and Clara stood outside a small white schoolhouse in Silver Creek. The children addressed her as Miss Clara. She was kind, patient, wise to them. Just a teacher with a gentle smile and a steady hand. No one knew what she'd done to come here. The town took her in. The wife of the storekeeper assisted in selecting curtains for her cottage. The blacksmith repaired her rifle, inquiring nothing. The sheriff, a taciturn man named Marshal Flynn, greeted her as a lady who can take care of herself. Life in Silver Creek was quiet, secure, all Clara had ever dreamed of. And yet sometimes, on the verge of sleeping, she would lean and listen for hooves that never arrived. Until that afternoon, standing there as she wiped the day's math off the blackboard, she heard voices at the door. 3 men, requesting directions. One of them froze her blood. Dalton. Clara crept to the window, her throat tight with a caught breath. There they were, him and the others. Alive. Healthier. Better armed. Dalton's left arm dangled limply at his side, broken from her bullet. But his face still wore that same cruel smile. But Dalton's eyes, they hadn't changed. That same cold, predatory gleam burned behind them. just as it had the night he tried to take everything from her. "We're looking for a woman," Dalton was saying to the postmaster, his voice slick with false charm. "About 35, dark hair. Might be Callan herself, a widow. Goes by Clara." The postmaster, God bless his instincts, didn't flinch. "Don't know nobody by that name, stranger," he replied bluntly. "Might try the next town over." Clara stood at the schoolhouse window, her smile grim. Small communities had their own justice, and Silver Creek had claimed her as one of their own. No one here would let her go, not to a man like Dalton. She knew him, however. Humiliation was a wound men like him never allowed to scab. And she hadn't just humiliated him, she'd shattered him. In public, he would return. She went quietly to her desk and opened the bottom drawer. Oiled cloth wrapped the Derringer Pete Morrison had presented her with before she left home. "For emergencies," he'd winked. "Sometimes a rifle's too loud." Clara tucked the little gun into her pocket and went out. Dalton and the others were simply mounting their horses, ready to ride on. His gaze swept the street and froze when it rested on her, standing quietly on the schoolhouse steps. For one frozen second, the world held its breath. His scarred face lit up with recognition. Then something else danced behind his eyes. Not rage, not hate, fear. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Clara said sweetly, her voice resonating like the toll of a church bell. "Lovely day to be traveling, isn't it?" Dalton's hand jerked toward his gun, then held still. The town hummed around him in its peaceful cadence. Children jumping rope, women hanging laundry, men speaking on porches. Too many eyes, too many witnesses, too much risk. He doffed his hat. "Mum." But his eyes swore this wasn't finished. Clara nodded, her hand in her pocket where the Derringer rested. "Safe travels." The three of them rode away slowly, their horses kicking up dust that glimmered in the sunlight of the afternoon. But Clara didn't send them off in fear. She sent them off in certainty. They'd return. Some men don't know when to stop. But that was all right, because she did. She'd discovered something profound on that awful night 3 months earlier. Something more than vengeance, something more than staying alive. It wasn't about dynamite or guns. She discovered that she didn't need to be anyone else. No one's wife, no one's victim. She was exactly who she had to be. If you got it while reading this story, if you saw yourself in Clara's courage, please consider supporting us with a super chat. It helps us share more stories like that. Click the video on your screen now because the next story isn't something you can tell. It's something you feel. And when it's over, you won't be the same.